The day everything changed, I was pruning roses in my garden. 40 years I'd lived in that craftsman house on Maple Street, raised 2 children there, buried a husband, and planted every single rosebush with my own hands. I remember reaching for a particularly stubborn branch when suddenly the garden tilted sideways. My pruning shears clattered to the ground. I tried to call out, but my words came out garbled, like someone had rewired my brain overnight. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was my neighbor Ed's face, his eyes wide with panic as he sprinted across our adjoining lawns. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I woke up 3 days later in Riverside General, with tubes snaking from my arms and the steady beep of machines confirming I was still alive. The stroke had hit the left side of my brain, the speech and movement center, the doctors explained. I couldn't form words, couldn't lift my right arm, couldn't even stand without assistance. In that moment, I wasn't Eleanor Blackwood, beloved English teacher and community volunteer. I was just another statistic, another elderly patient with a long, uncertain recovery ahead. What I didn't know then was that my children had already started dividing up my possessions. I wasn't always the silent observer in my children's lives. Once upon a time, Michael and Rebecca depended on me for everything. I still remember Michael's first asthma attack, how I stayed awake for 72 hours straight, monitoring his breathing, researching specialists until I found the best pediatric pulmonologist in 3 states, and Rebecca's dyslexia diagnosis in 2nd grade. I spent every evening for 2 years developing customized reading exercises, working alongside her while my dinner grew cold and my own grading piled up. My husband Thomas always said I gave too much. "Ellie," he'd tell me, "you can't pour from an empty cup." But I never saw it as sacrifice. They were my children. What else would a mother do? When Thomas died of heart failure 8 years ago, Michael and Rebecca were already grown with families of their own. Michael had followed his father's footsteps into finance, becoming an investment banker with a corner office and a view of downtown. Rebecca had built a successful career in marketing, specializing in luxury real estate. They both had beautiful homes in the suburbs, private schools for their children, annual vacations to Europe or the Caribbean. I sold Thomas's beloved sailboat to help Michael with the down payment on his house. When Rebecca needed seed money to start her marketing firm, I liquidated the stocks Thomas and I had been saving for a European cruise in our retirement. Small sacrifices in the grand scheme of things. I never regretted them. What I did regret was how gradually, almost imperceptibly, our relationship changed after Thomas died. The Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly. Phone calls grew shorter, more perfunctory. At first, I chalked it up to their busy lives. But then I began noticing other things. Rebecca started bringing me brochures for retirement communities. "Just something to think about, Mom," she'd say casually. "This place has wonderful activities. You wouldn't be so isolated." Michael would casually mention how valuable craftsman homes had become in Riverside's real estate market. "You're sitting on a gold mine, Mom. Have you considered downsizing?" I wasn't ready to leave my home, my garden, my neighborhood. The house was paid off, and between my teacher's pension and Thomas's life insurance, I was comfortable. Besides, I wasn't some fragile old woman who needed to be tucked away. I was still teaching adult literacy at the library twice a week, still serving on the community garden board, still perfectly capable of living independently. "I appreciate your concern," I told them firmly, "but I'm staying put." That seemed to settle things, at least on the surface. But I couldn't help noticing how they'd exchange glances when I mentioned needing a plumber for a leaky faucet, or when I complained about the property taxes increasing. In their eyes, I was becoming a problem to solve. Still, I believed in them. These were the children I'd raised to be compassionate, to value family above all else. They were good people who loved me. They just didn't understand how much this house, this independence, meant to me. Then came the stroke. and everything I thought I knew about my children was turned upside down. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital before being transferred to Riverside Rehabilitation Center. The first month passed in a haze of frustration and small victories. Learning to hold a spoon again, forming simple words, taking a few steps with a walker. Dr. Whitman, my neurologist, was cautiously optimistic. "You're making remarkable progress, Eleanor," she told me. "Your determination is impressive." What she didn't say, what I pieced together from nurses' whispered conversations, was that my children had already been discussing long-term care options. Not rehabilitation, not recovery, but permanent care. I discovered why one afternoon when Grace, my physical therapist, wheeled me into the garden for our session. We were working on coordination exercises when she mentioned, almost casually, "Your house sold quickly. In this market, I'm not surprised." My hand froze mid-exercise. My house? The words came out slurred but understandable. 3 weeks of speech therapy had given me back that much. Grace's expression shifted instantly to concern. "I'm sorry. I thought you knew. I overheard your daughter on the phone yesterday. She was telling someone the closing was next week." The world tilted again, not from another stroke, but from betrayal. My house, my home, sold without my knowledge, without my consent? How was that even possible? I thought back to the documents I'd signed years ago after Thomas died. Power of attorney forms, just in case something happened to me. Michael had insisted it was standard procedure. "Just a precaution, Mom," he'd said. "You do the same for us." Now I understood what that precaution really meant. That night, I lay awake in my hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, forming a plan. My body might be weakened, my speech impaired, but my mind was razor sharp. If Michael and Rebecca thought they could erase 40 years of my life without consequence, they were about to learn otherwise. The next morning, I asked to use the phone. When the nurse brought it, I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Marcus Jensen's office," a receptionist answered. "Eleanor Blackwood," I managed to say. "Need see him. Urgent." There was a pause on the line. Marcus had been my attorney for decades, handling Thomas's will, our estate planning, everything. "Mrs. Blackwood, we heard about your stroke. I'm so sorry. Let me check if Mr. Jensen can come to you." 2 days later, Marcus sat beside my bed, his familiar weathered face creased with concern. At 70, he'd been threatening retirement for years, but couldn't quite bring himself to leave his practice. "Ellie," he said gently, using the nickname few people did anymore. "What's happened?" I took my time, forcing each word out clearly despite my frustration. I told him about the house, about the power of attorney, about my suspicions that Michael and Rebecca were dismantling my life while I was too incapacitated to stop them. Marcus listened, his expression darkening. When I finished, he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "This is troubling. Legally, with the power of attorney, they can make financial decisions if you're incapacitated. But selling your primary residence without your explicit consent or clear necessity." He shook his head. "At minimum, it's ethically questionable." Can stop it? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I asked. "Possibly. We'll need to demonstrate you're of sound mind, capable of making your own decisions." He leaned forward. "But Ellie, challenging your children legally could get messy. Are you sure you want to go down that road?" I thought about every dinner I'd cooked for them, every school project I'd helped with, every financial sacrifice I'd made without hesitation. I thought about the casual way they'd decided my home didn't matter, that my wishes didn't matter. "Yes," I said clearly. "Very sure." Marcus nodded. "Then here's what we'll do." Over the next week, Marcus arranged for a court-appointed evaluator to assess my mental capacity. Dr. Whitman provided documentation showing my cognitive functions were unimpaired despite my physical limitations. And most importantly, Marcus discovered something that changed everything. "The house isn't just in your name," he told me during his next visit. "The deed was never updated after Thomas died. It's still in both your names, held in a specific type of joint tenancy. Due to a quirk in the language, the power of attorney Michael wouldn't apply to the property without additional specific authorization, which wasn't included." For the first time since the stroke, I smiled, a real smile that reached my eyes. "What want now?" I asked. "That depends," Marcus said, pulling out a legal pad. "What do you want?" I spent the next hour outlining exactly what I wanted. A new will, revocation of the existing power of attorney, and something special, something that would ensure my children understood the consequences of their actions. As Marcus was leaving, I caught his sleeve. "One more thing." "Yes?" "Don't tell them," I said, the words coming out surprisingly clear. "Let me." Marcus's eyes twinkled. "Ellie Blackwood, you always were a force to be reckoned with, stroke or no stroke." That afternoon, during my physical therapy session, Grace noticed the change in me. "You seem different today," she observed as she helped me practice standing. "Have plan," I told her. "Good for you," she said, supporting my elbow as I took a shaky step forward. "You know, most stroke patients your age would be satisfied with basic recovery. But you're pushing for complete rehabilitation. It's inspiring." I gripped the parallel bars, determination fueling every movement. "Not done yet." Grace smiled. "No, I don't think you are." That evening, Rebecca came to visit, bringing a glossy brochure for Sunset Vista Assisted Living. She pulled a chair next to my bed and took my hand in hers, her expression a practiced mask of concern. "Mom, I've found the perfect place for you," she began, her voice too bright, too cheerful. "It's beautiful, like a resort. They have daily activities, 24-hour care, everything you could need." I withdrew my hand from hers. "My house?" I asked directly. Rebecca's smile faltered. "What about it? You sold it." The accusation hung in the air between us. Rebecca's cheeks flushed. "It was the logical decision, Mom," she said, her tone shifting from cheerful to defensive. "You can't possibly live there anymore, not after the stroke. The stairs alone would be impossible." Michael and I discussed it thoroughly. "Without me," I said, each word deliberate and clear. "You were in no condition to participate in those discussions," Rebecca replied, crossing her arms. "We did what any responsible children would do." I looked at her, really looked at her, and wondered when she had become this person. When had my thoughtful, compassionate daughter transformed into someone who could dismiss my autonomy so easily? "The closing," I said. "When?" "Next Wednesday," she admitted, not meeting my eyes. "But Mom, it's for the best. The money from the sale will ensure you have excellent care for the rest of your life." I nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in understanding. "Wednesday," I repeated. "Good to know." Rebecca seemed relieved by my apparent acceptance. She spent the rest of her visit chattering about the amenities at Sunset Vista, about how I'd make new friends, about how much simpler my life would be. I let her talk, conserving my energy for the battle ahead. After she left, I asked the nurse for my phone again. This time I called my neighbor, Ed Griffith. "Ellie," he exclaimed when he realized who was calling. "How are you? Everyone's been asking about you." "Need favor," I said. "Big one." Ed had been my neighbor for 15 years. After his wife died, I'd brought him dinner twice a week for months. When his arthritis flared up, I'd help tend his garden. We looked out for each other, the way neighbors used to do. Anything, he promised. Just name it. I told him what I needed, speaking slowly to ensure my words were clear. When I finished, there was a pause on the line. "You're sure about this?" he asked finally. "Never more sure." "Then consider it done," he said firmly. "Those kids of yours never did appreciate what they had in you, Ellie." I hung up feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The pieces were falling into place. Now I just needed my body to cooperate with my plan. The next morning, I attacked my therapy sessions with renewed vigor. Grace was startled by my intensity. "Whoa, slow down," she cautioned as I pushed myself to take more steps than usual. "Recovery isn't a race." "Need be stronger," I insisted. "By Wednesday." Grace gave me a searching look. "What happens Wednesday?" I managed a crooked smile. "Everything." For the next 5 days, I doubled down on every aspect of my recovery. I badgered the speech therapist into giving me extra exercises. I practiced walking when no one was watching, gripping the rail of my bed for support. I even convinced one of the younger nurses to sneak in additional weights for my arm exercises. By Tuesday evening, I could walk short distances with just a cane. My speech was still slurred, but increasingly comprehensible. And I had regained enough dexterity in my right hand to sign my name, which would prove essential. Wednesday morning dawned clear and bright. I woke early, requested a shower, and asked for my own clothes instead of the hospital gown. The nurse raised her eyebrows, but helped me dress in the outfit Laura, my best friend, had brought from my closet, a simple blue dress I'd always favored, paired with comfortable flats. "Special occasion?" the nurse asked as she helped me brush my hair. "Homecoming," I replied. At precisely 10 a.m., Marcus arrived at the rehabilitation center. With him was Howard Miller, the manager of Heritage Trust Bank, and a notary public. My doctor had already signed off on my capacity to make decisions, and Marcus had prepared all the necessary paperwork. "Everything's in order," Marcus assured me, opening his briefcase on the small table in my room. "We just need your signatures." One by one, I signed the documents. Revocation of power of attorney, a new detailed advance directive, updated will, and finally, the document that would change everything, a trust agreement with very specific terms. "Are you absolutely certain about these conditions?" Marcus asked one last time, indicating the trust document. "Completely," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Just as we finished, there was a commotion in the hallway. I heard Michael's voice, then Rebecca's, both raised in argument with someone, presumably the nurse who'd tried to stop them. The door burst open, and there stood my children, expressions somewhere between shock and outrage. "What is going on? Here?" Michael demanded, his gaze darting from me to Marcus to the bank manager. "Mom, what are you doing?" I straightened in my chair, gripping my cane. Taking back control. Rebecca stepped forward, her professional smile firmly in place despite the tension radiating from her. "Mom, you should have told us you wanted to meet with Marcus. We would have arranged it properly." She turned to the attorney. "Marcus, you know Mom's not well. Any legal decisions should involve us as her power of attorneys." "Former power of attorneys," Marcus corrected mildly, handing her a copy of the revocation I'd just signed. "Your mother has been evaluated and deemed fully competent to manage her own affairs." Michael snatched the document, scanning it quickly. His face flushed. "This is ridiculous. She can barely speak, barely walk. She had a stroke, for God's sake." "A stroke," Dr. Whitman said, entering the room behind them, "which affected her speech and mobility, not her cognitive abilities or decision-making capacity." She crossed to stand beside me, a subtle but clear statement of support. "And as for walking," I said, pushing myself up from the chair with my cane. "Getting better every day. The shock on their faces as I stood would have been comical under different circumstances. For weeks, they'd been making decisions based on the assumption that I was helpless, that I would remain helpless. Seeing me stand, hearing me speak, however, imperfectly, forced them to confront the reality of my recovery. "What about the house?" Rebecca asked, her voice smaller now. "The closing is in 2 hours." "Cancelled," I said simply. "You can't do that," Michael protested. "The paperwork is already processed. The buyers had no valid contract," Marcus interjected smoothly. "As I've already explained to them and their attorney this morning, the power of attorney you held did not extend to selling Eleanor's primary residence without specific authorization." Michael's face went from flushed to pale. "That's not possible." "I reviewed the documents myself," Howard from the bank confirmed. "The sale cannot legally proceed." Rebecca sank into a chair, her perfect composure finally cracking. "We were only trying to help," she whispered. "The stairs in that house, the maintenance, you can't manage it anymore, Mom." "My decision," I said firmly. "Not yours." Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it sent a pang through my heart despite everything. "So what happens now? You go back to that house alone? Fall down the stairs with no one to help you? Is that what you want?" "No," I said. "Not alone." I nodded to Marcus, who handed each of my children a sealed envelope. "What's this?" Michael asked suspiciously. "Your mother has established a trust," Marcus explained. "The terms are outlined in those documents. I suggest you read them carefully." As Michael and Rebecca opened their envelopes, I watched their expressions shift from confusion to disbelief. "This can't be serious," Rebecca said finally, looking up from the papers. "Mom, you're giving the house to Laura? Your friend Laura?" "Not giving," I corrected. "Sharing." The truth was more nuanced than Rebecca's simplification. What I'd done was create a living arrangement that would allow me to remain in my home while ensuring I had support. Laura, widowed like me and recently retired from her nursing career, would move into the converted garage apartment. In exchange, for reduced rent, she would help with certain household tasks and provide companionship. The house itself would be placed in a trust, with specific conditions regarding its future. "And this part about our inheritance?" Michael asked, his voice tight. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No joke," I said. "Very serious." The trust stipulated that Michael and Rebecca would indeed inherit the house and remaining assets after my death, but only after completing certain requirements. Weekly visits to me for at least a year, participation in family therapy sessions, volunteer work at the Stroke Recovery Center where I was currently rehabilitating, and most significantly, a documented change in their approach to elder care, to be evaluated by the trustee, Marcus. "This is manipulation," Michael said, crumpling the paper in his hand. "You're punishing us for making difficult decisions when you couldn't." "No," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Teaching you what really matters, before too late." Rebecca was still staring at the document, tears welling in her eyes. "You think we only care about the money," she said softly. "That we don't love you." "Show me different," I challenged. A heavy silence fell over the room. Dr. Whitman quietly excused herself, followed by Howard and the notary. Marcus remained, a steadfast presence at my side. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "We were afraid, Mom. When you had the stroke, when we didn't know if you'd wake up. It was like losing Dad all over again." "So you erased me," I said. "Sold my home, planned my future, without asking." "We thought we were doing the right thing," Rebecca insisted, wiping at her tears. "The practical thing." "Life not just practical," I said, tapping my chest. "It's this: family, respect, love." Another silence, this one less hostile, more contemplative. "So what do we do now?" Michael asked finally. I gestured toward the raw door. Take me home. Rebecca looked startled. Today? But your rehabilitation? Outpatient, I said. Already arranged. Marcus cleared his throat. Eleanor will continue her therapy as an outpatient. Laura has agreed to move in this weekend to help with the transition, and your neighbor Ed has organized a rotation of community volunteers to assist with meals and transportation to appointments until Eleanor is more independent. The community? Michael repeated, looking bemused. You mean people from the neighborhood? Friends, I corrected. People who care. People who see me, not just my limitations. The implied criticism hit its mark. Both of my children had the grace to look ashamed. I'm sorry, Mom, Rebecca said softly. I didn't realize. We didn't think. Now you will, I said firmly. Every week, in therapy. A reluctant smile tugged at Michael's mouth. You're not giving us much choice, are you? Always choice, I replied. Show up or don't. Love or don't. Your decision. Rebecca stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. I'll drive you home, she offered. And I'd like to come by tomorrow, too, if that's okay. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It wasn't a return to the relationship we'd had before, but it was a start. Yes, I said, allowing a small smile. Tomorrow good. As Marcus helped me gather my few belongings, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. Gray-haired, still weak on one side, leaning on a cane, but standing. Independent. And for the first time since the stroke, truly hopeful about what lay ahead. My children had tried to write the end of my story without me. Instead, they'd unwittingly helped me begin a new chapter. One where I would never again allow anyone to silence my voice or dismiss my wishes. One where they would have the opportunity to become the people I'd always believed they could be. As we left the rehabilitation center, the sunshine warm on my face, I thought about the garden waiting for me at home. The roses would need tending. New seeds would need planting. There was still so much growth ahead. The drive home from Riverside Rehabilitation Center was silent. Michael kept his eyes fixed on the road, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Rebecca sat beside me in the back seat, occasionally reaching to adjust my blanket or offer water I didn't need. Their attentiveness felt hollow now, performative rather than genuine. I gazed out the window, watching familiar landmarks come into view. The elementary school where I'd taught for 15 years before moving to the high school. The community garden I'd helped establish. The coffee shop where Thomas and I used to spend Sunday mornings reading the newspaper to each other. When we turned onto Maple Street, my heart constricted at the sight of the for sale sign still planted in my front yard. Michael noticed my expression and muttered, "I'll take care of that," before pulling into the driveway. I said nothing, simply acknowledging his words with a slight nod. The sign was the least of my concerns now. Ed Griffith was waiting on my porch, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile as we arrived. Next to him stood Laura, my closest friend since we'd both started teaching at Riverside Elementary 4 decades ago. Behind them, I could see half a dozen neighbors moving around inside my house through the windows. "Welcome home, Ellie," Ed called, coming down the steps to open my car door. The cavalry's assembled. Rebecca stiffened beside me. "We didn't realize you'd arranged all this," she said, gesturing toward the gathering. "Not me," I replied truthfully. "Friends did." Laura approached, her eyes suspiciously bright as she leaned down to embrace me. "We've got everything." "Ready," she whispered. "Just like you asked." With Ed's support on one side and my cane on the other, I made my way up the familiar path to my front door. Each step was a small victory, a testament to the hours of therapy I'd endured and the countless more that lay ahead. I could feel Michael and Rebecca trailing behind us, their presence uncertain, as if they were visitors rather than family. The house smelled of lemon polish and fresh flowers. Someone had been cleaning, thoroughly. The hardwood floors gleamed, the windows sparkled, and vases of garden blossoms brightened every surface. But what caught my eye immediately were the changes, practical modifications that would make my recovery easier. A ramp had been installed alongside the front steps. The furniture in the living room had been rearranged to create wider pathways. Grab bars had been mounted in strategic locations. "Surprise," Laura said softly. "The neighborhood renovation? Committee has been busy." "When did all this happen?" Michael asked, his tone somewhere between impressed and defensive. "Past week," Ed replied, not bothering to hide the edge in his voice. "Once we heard what was happening with the house. Figured if Ellie was coming home, and we all believed she would, she'd need some adjustments." I moved slowly through the entryway into the living room, tears welling in my eyes at the sight of familiar faces. Judy from across the street, who'd brought me soup when I had pneumonia 3 winters ago. Charlie from 2 doors down, whose children I'd tutored through difficult school years. Taylor, the young librarian who co-managed the literacy program with me. They'd all come. They'd all believed in my return when my own children had already written me off. "Kitchen's stocked," Charlie announced. "Freezer's full of meals for the next 2 weeks. Got a schedule worked out for who's bringing fresh ones after that. And I've set up a medication reminder system," Judy added, pointing to a digital device on the side table. "It'll ping when it's time for your pills. Voice-activated, so no fiddling with tiny buttons." I sank into my favorite armchair, overwhelmed by their thoughtfulness. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice still slurred but conveying the depth of my gratitude. Michael cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "This is very kind of everyone. But Rebecca and I can handle things from here. Mom needs to rest now." The room grew still, a collective breath held as everyone looked to me for direction. I met Michael's gaze steadily. "Not tired," I said firmly. "Need to talk, with you and Rebecca, alone." The neighbors exchanged glances, then began making their excuses, promising to return tomorrow, leaving containers labeled with reheating instructions, pressing gentle hands to my shoulder as they filed out. Only Laura remained, settling into the chair opposite mine with a determined set to her jaw. "I'm staying," she said, not to me but to my children. "That's the arrangement now." Once the front door closed behind the last neighbor, Michael turned to face me, his expression guarded. "Mom, what exactly is going on here? Yesterday, you were in rehab with a long-term care plan. Today, you've revoked our legal authority, canceled a house sale, created some kind of trust with conditions, and apparently organized a neighborhood support system without saying a word to us." "Not yesterday," I corrected. "Been planning since heard about house." The words came slowly, each one an effort, but I pressed on. "Found out by accident. You never told me." Rebecca sank onto the couch, her composure cracking. "We were going to tell you once everything was settled, once we found the right facility." "Right for who?" Laura interjected sharply. "Certainly not for Ellie." "Stay out of this," Michael snapped. "This is a family matter." "That's exactly why I'm here," Laura replied evenly. "Because I am family to Ellie, the kind that asks what she wants instead of deciding for her." I raised my hand, silencing them both. "Enough." I took a deep breath, concentrating on forming my words as clearly as possible. Need to understand why. Why sell without asking? Why decide my future? There was a long pause. Rebecca stared at her hands, twisting her wedding ring. Michael paced the length of the living room before finally stopping at the fireplace, his back to us as he studied the family photos arranged on the mantel. "The doctors weren't optimistic at first," he said finally, his voice low. "They said the damage was extensive, that recovery would be limited, that you might never regain independent living skills." "Dr. Whitman?" I asked, knowing she had never been so definitive in her prognosis to me. "No, the first doctor at the hospital," Rebecca cut in. "Before Dr. Whitman took over your case, he said most stroke patients your age either plateau early in recovery or decline. He advised us to prepare for the worst-case scenario." "And the worst case meant selling my home?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't soften them with a smile or a gentler tone. I needed them to hear the hurt beneath my anger. "We were trying to be practical," Michael insisted, turning back to face me. "This house has 3 bedrooms you don't use, stairs you can't climb, a yard that's too much work even before the stroke. The sale would have provided funds for quality long-term care." "Or early inheritance," Laura muttered under her breath. Michael's face flushed. "That's completely uncalled for. We weren't taking a penny for ourselves." "Really?" I asked, forcing my tired mouth to form the word precisely. "Then why rush? Why not wait until I could participate in decision?" Rebecca and Michael exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret, a flicker of guilt, perhaps, or a silent agreement about how to proceed. "The real estate market in Riverside is hot right now," Rebecca said finally. "Properties like this are selling within days, often above asking price. We wanted to maximize the value to ensure you had the best care possible. And," Michael added, his tone softening, "we thought a clean break would be easier for you. No lingering attachment to a house you couldn't return to." I absorbed their explanations, searching their faces for signs they truly believed what they were saying. They did, I realized. In their minds, they'd acted out of pragmatism and a warped sense of mercy. But beneath those rationalizations lay something uglier, the assumption that my life was effectively over, that I had no say in what remained of it, that my needs and wishes were secondary to their convenience. "The house is not just property," I said slowly. "It's my life, my memories, my independence." "But that independence is gone now, Mom," Rebecca insisted, leaning forward. "You can't drive anymore. You can't tend your garden the way you used to. You can't even make a cup of tea without risking burns if your right hand gives out. How is that independence?" "By my choice," I replied firmly. "My limitations, my decisions about how to live with them." Laura reached over and squeezed my left hand, a gesture of solidarity that gave me strength to continue. "You decided I was finished," I said, each word deliberate. "A problem to solve, not a person with voice." Michael winced but didn't deny it. "We were overwhelmed, Mom. The doctors, the insurance forms, the rehabilitation options. It was all happening so fast. We did what we thought was best." "Without asking what I thought was best," I countered. A heavy silence settled over the room. Outside, the afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the polished floor. I felt exhaustion creeping in at the edges of my determination, but I wasn't finished yet. "There's something else," I said, turning to Rebecca. "The, bracelet. Your grandmother's pearl bracelet. It's missing from my jewelry box." Rebecca's face blanched. I was just keeping it safe. With the house being shown to strangers, I thought." "And the first editions?" I asked, nodding toward the bookshelf where my father's collection had stood. "The space is there. Books. Missing." My daughter's eyes filled with tears. "I took them to be appraised," she admitted in a small voice. "I thought they should be insured separately, especially if they were going to be moved." "Divided already," I said, the hurt lancing through me sharper than any physical pain. "Before I was even gone." Michael at least had the decency to look ashamed. "It wasn't like that, Mom. We were just preparing." "For my death?" I asked bluntly. "Or for my inconvenient continued existence?" Neither of them answered. They didn't need to. The truth hung in the air between us, unmistakable and ugly. They had begun the process of erasing me, distributing my possessions, selling my home, relegating me to a facility where I wouldn't disrupt their carefully ordered lives. And they had done it all under the guise of care, of responsibility, of practical necessity. I was tired now, the emotional toll of the confrontation depleting what little energy I had regained. Laura, sensing this, stood up. "Ellie needs to rest now," she announced, her tone brooking no argument. "The visiting nurse will be here at 7 tomorrow morning to help with her morning routine. After that, the physical therapist comes at 10. You're welcome to visit after noon." Michael looked like he wanted to protest being dismissed from his mother's house, but something in Laura's expression stopped him. "We'll bring your things from the rehabilitation center tomorrow," he said instead, addressing me directly. "Is there anything specific you need tonight?" "Just peace," I replied honestly. "Time to think." Rebecca approached hesitantly, bending to kiss my cheek. I didn't pull away, but I didn't return the gesture either. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I really thought we were doing the right thing." "No, you did," I acknowledged. "That's what hurts most." After they left, Laura helped me to the downstairs guest bedroom, which the neighbors had converted into a temporary main bedroom for me until I could manage the stairs again. Someone had brought my nightgowns down from the master bedroom, laid out my toiletries in the adjacent bathroom, even placed my reading glasses and current novel on the nightstand. These small kindnesses, set against my children's grand betrayal, brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Do you want to talk about it?" Laura asked as she helped me change into a nightgown. I shook my head, suddenly too drained for more words. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new therapy challenges, new adjustments to my altered reality. Tonight, I needed to simply absorb the fact that I was home. Truly home, despite the best efforts of those who should have fought hardest to keep me here. Laura seemed to understand. She squeezed my hand and turned to leave, pausing at the door. "For what it's worth, Ellie, what you did today was the bravest thing I've ever seen. Standing up to your own children, forcing them to see you as a person with agency instead of a problem to manage, that took incredible courage." "Not courage," I said softly. "Necessity." That night, in the familiar comfort of my own home, I dreamed of Thomas. We were in the garden, deadheading roses together as we'd done countless summer evenings. His hands, always so steady, worked alongside mine, snipping away spent blooms to encourage new growth. "You have to be ruthless sometimes," he was saying, as he'd often told me when I hesitated to cut back a plant drastically. "Prune hard now for better blooms later." I woke before dawn, the dream still vivid in my mind. Outside my window, I could just make out the silhouettes of my rose bushes in the dim light. They would need attention soon, pruning, feeding, careful tending to heal from neglect during my absence. Much like my relationship with my children, I realized. Cut back to essentials now, establish firm boundaries, and perhaps, with time and right conditions, new growth might emerge, healthier than before. The next few weeks passed in a blur of therapy sessions, medical appointments, and gradual adjustments to my new reality. True to their word, the neighbors maintained a rotation of support, driving me to appointments, bringing fresh meals, helping with household tasks I couldn't yet manage on my own. Laura settled into the garage apartment, her presence a constant, reassurance without being intrusive. Michael and Rebecca kept their distance at first, calling rather than visiting, their conversations stilted and awkward. I didn't push for more. The trust documents Marcus had prepared laid out clear expectations: weekly visits for a year, family therapy, volunteer work at the stroke center. The ball was in their court now. They could fulfill these requirements and rebuild our relationship, or they could walk away entirely. I had made my peace with either outcome. 3 weeks after my return home, I was sitting in the garden with Grace, my physical therapist, working through hand-strengthening exercises, When Rebecca's car pulled into the driveway, my daughter emerged, looking uncharacteristically casual in jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail rather than her usual polished style. "Am I interrupting?" she asked, hovering uncertainly at the garden gate. Grace glanced at me for direction. I nodded slightly, and she gathered her equipment. "We're about finished anyway. Same time Thursday, Eleanor?" "Yes. Thank you," I replied, pleased that the words came more easily now. Daily speech therapy was gradually restoring my ability to communicate, though I still struggled with complex sentences and occasionally lost words mid-thought. As Grace left, Rebecca took the seat opposite me, her eyes taking in the garden, the weeds sprouting between the pavers, the overgrown lavender, the roses desperately in need of attention. "It's gotten away from you a bit," she observed. "Gardens wait," I said simply. First priority was walking, then speech, then fine motor skills. I held up my right hand, which still trembled slightly but could now grasp small objects. "Gardens patient." Rebecca nodded, her gaze now fixed on her hands folded in her lap. "I brought back Grandma's bracelet," she said finally, pulling a small velvet pouch from her pocket. "And the books. They're in the car." "Thank you." A silence stretched between us, neither comfortable nor entirely hostile. A bird sang in the maple tree overhead, its melody incongruously cheerful against our strained interaction. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Rebecca began hesitantly. "About us deciding you were finished. A problem to solve instead of a person." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "I want you to know that isn't how I see you. It never was. But I realize now that's how my actions made you feel, and I'm truly sorry for that." I studied her face, searching for the sincerity behind her practiced words. Rebecca had always been skilled at saying what people wanted to hear. It made her excellent at her marketing career, but genuine emotional honesty was harder for her. "Why really sell house?" I asked, cutting through the apology to the heart of the matter. Truth this time. Rebecca's composure faltered. She looked away, then back, her eyes suddenly swimming with tears. "Because I was terrified," she admitted, her voice breaking. "When I saw you in that hospital bed, tubes everywhere, not able to speak or move, it was like losing Dad all over again. Except worse, because you were still here, but not really here." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she brushed it away impatiently. The doctors kept using phrases like new normal and quality of life adjustments. Michael was talking about power of attorney responsibilities and financial planning. Everyone was acting like you were never coming back, not the mom I knew, and I couldn't bear it. "So decided it was easier if I didn't," I said softly, understanding dawning. "If you handled everything. Close that chapter." Rebecca nodded miserably. "It sounds horrible now, but in that moment, it felt like the kindest thing. To create a clear plan, manage the transition, make everything smooth and orderly. No lingering, no false hope, no drawn-out decline." She looked up, her eyes pleading. "I'm a planner, Mom. When things fall apart, I make plans. It's how I cope." "By controlling," I observed, without judgment. It was a trait she'd inherited from me, though I'd learned over the years to temper it with flexibility. Even when not yours to control. "Yes," she whispered. "Even then. Especially then." I reached across the small garden table and took her hand in mine, my left hand still strong and steady. "I understand," I said. And I did. Fear could make monsters of us all, drive us to actions we'd later regret out of desperate desire to impose order on chaos, certainty on the unknown. Rebecca squeezed my hand, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't deserve your understanding. What we did What I did was unforgivable. Not unforgivable, I corrected. Just wrong. Big difference. How do I make it right? She asked, sounding younger suddenly, like the little girl who used to ask me how to fix her mistakes. I gestured toward the overgrown garden surrounding us. Start here. Help me rebuild, step by step. Her gaze traveled over the tangled roses, the weedy paths, the general disarray of what had once been my pride and joy. Then she looked back at me, really looked, taking in the changes the stroke had left behind, the slight droop on the right side of my face, the tremor in my hand, the cane leaning against my chair. Okay, she said quietly. Where do we begin? For the next several hours, we worked side by side in the garden. Rebecca followed my halting instructions, cutting back dead growth, pulling weeds, turning soil around struggling plants. We didn't speak much beyond the necessary communication about the tasks at hand, but something shifted between us, a tentative bridge forming across the chasm of hurt and betrayal. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the freshly tended beds, Rebecca sat back on her heels, surveying our progress. It's still a mess, she observed, but less of one. Gardens and relationships, I replied. Same way. Time and attention, cutting away dead parts, fresh soil, new growth. Rebecca smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. When did... You get so philosophical, Mom. Stroke, I said, tapping my temple. Makes you think about what matters. Before she could respond, the garden gate opened, and Michael appeared, looking startled to find us both dirt-streaked and sweaty among the roses. I tried calling, he said, holding up his phone. When you didn't answer, I thought I'd check if everything was okay. Fine, I assured him. Phone inside. Been gardening. Michael's gaze swept over the half-restored flower beds, Rebecca's soil-stained jeans, my tired but content expression. Something complicated flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or regret at being excluded from this moment of reconciliation. I see, he said stiffly. Well, I just wanted to let you know I've signed up for the volunteer orientation at the Stroke Center. It's next Tuesday evening. I nodded, acknowledging this first step toward meeting the trust requirements. Good. Thank you. An awkward silence fell. Rebecca stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. I should get going. Emma has a recital tonight. She hesitated, then added, Maybe I could bring her to visit this weekend? She's been asking about you. Like that, I said, genuinely pleased at the prospect of seeing my granddaughter. Sunday afternoon? Sunday it is. Rebecca bent to kiss my cheek, her usual polished reserve replaced by a new, careful tenderness. I'll bring scones from that bakery you like. After she left, Michael remained standing by the gate, his posture rigid, his expression guarded. Unlike Rebecca, he hadn't yet offered a genuine apology or explanation for his actions. Our interactions since my return home had been formal, focused on practical matters rather than emotional reconciliation. Join me? I invited, gesturing to the chair Rebecca had vacated. He hesitated, then crossed the garden to sit opposite me. Up close, I could see the strain in his face, the shadows under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. You and Rebecca seem to have reached an understanding, he observed, his tone carefully neutral. Beginning one, I clarified. Long way go still. Michael nodded, his gaze fixed on the freshly turned earth rather than on me. The trust conditions, he said abruptly. They're humiliating, treating us like children who need to be taught how to care about their mother. I let his words hang in the air between us, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. The evening breeze stirred the rose petals, carrying their sweet scent across the garden. How would you have felt? I asked finally. If someone sold your home without asking? Divided your possessions? Decided your future? He flinched slightly but didn't answer. The trust, not punishment, I continued. Structure. For rebuilding trust, you broke. Michael ran a hand through his hair, that gesture so like his father's, and sighed deeply. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. I don't know if I can be what you want me to be. Don't want you to be anything, I replied simply. Just want you to see me. Person still here. Different, yes. Damaged, yes. But still me. Still deserving of voice. For the first time since the confrontation at the rehabilitation center, Michael really looked at me. Not at the stroke patient, not at the problem to be managed, but at his mother. His eyes filled with tears, and he quickly looked away, embarrassed by this uncharacteristic show of emotion. I didn't know what to do, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I'm not good at this. Illness, vulnerability, decline. Dad's death nearly broke me. And when I saw you in that hospital bed... He trailed off, swallowing hard. Easier to handle practically, I finished for him. Forms, finances, arrangements, not feelings. He nodded, relieved at my understanding. Rebecca and I approached it differently, but we ended up in the same place. She planned obsessively to manage her fear. I detached emotionally and focused on logistics to manage mine. And neither asked what I needed, I pointed out gently. No, he agreed, meeting my eyes again. We didn't. And I'm sorry for that. Mom, truly sorry. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. There were still hurt feelings on both sides, trust to be rebuilt, patterns to be broken. But it was a start, a recognition of the harm done, and a willingness, however tentative, to forge a new path forward. As darkness fell over the garden, Michael helped me inside. His support neither overprotective nor reluctant, but measured to my actual needs. It was, I realized, the first time since the stroke that one of my children had treated me as a person, rather than a patient or a problem. That night, as Laura helped me prepare for bed, she noticed a change in my demeanor. Good day? She asked, arranging my pills in the organizer for the next morning. Better than expected, I replied. Garden half rescued. Rebecca apologized, Michael beginning to understand. Laura smiled, adjusting my pillows so I could sit comfortably to read before sleep. And you? How are you feeling about all of it? I considered the question carefully. The betrayal still stung. The trust that had been broken wouldn't be easily repaired. But beneath the hurt and disappointment, a flicker of hope had kindled. Not for a return to what was, but for the possibility of something new. Something that honored the reality of my changed condition while respecting my personhood, my agency, my right to determine my own future. Hopeful, I said finally. Cautiously hopeful. The next morning brought a new challenge. My first outpatient speech therapy session coincided with a meeting Marcus had arranged with the couple who had attempted to purchase my house. Despite the canceled sale, they were pursuing legal action, claiming breach of contract and seeking compensation for various expenses incurred. You don't need to attend, Marcus assured me during his early morning visit to discuss the situation. I can represent your interests fully. Want to be there? I insisted. My house, my fight. Marcus smiled, a glint of admiration in his eyes. I had a feeling you'd say that. The meeting's scheduled for 3 this afternoon at my office. I'll send a car for you. The law office of Jensen and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated textile mill downtown. As promised, Marcus sent a car. Not just any car, but his own personal vehicle with his longtime assistant Walter behind the wheel. The gesture wasn't lost on me. Marcus wasn't merely providing transportation. He was making a statement about my standing as a valued client. Mrs. Blackwood, Walter greeted me warmly as he helped me from the house to the car. It's good to see you up and about. Mr. Jensen speaks very highly of your recovery. Laura hovered on the porch, uncertainty written across her face. "Are you sure you don't want me to come along? This sounds like it could be stressful." I shook my head firmly. "Need do this myself." My speech had improved significantly over the past few weeks, though I still occasionally dropped articles and pronouns when tired or emotional. Important they see me, not just name on paper. The ride downtown took 15 minutes, during which I mentally rehearsed what I wanted to say at the meeting. Marcus had advised me to let him do most of the talking, but there were points I was determined to make personally, regardless of my still impaired speech. Walter pulled up to the building's side entrance, where an elevator provided direct access to the third floor. "Mr. Jensen is waiting for you upstairs," he said, coming around to help me out of the car. "Take your time, Mrs. Blackwood. No rush." I made my way slowly into the building, leaning on my cane. My right leg had regained much of its strength, but my balance remained unreliable, especially in unfamiliar settings. The elevator ride was brief, opening directly into the tasteful reception area of Marcus's firm. Marcus himself was waiting for me, dressed in one of his impeccable charcoal suits. "Right on time, Ellie," he said warmly, extending his arm for support. "The Templetons and their attorney arrived a few minutes ago. They're in the conference room." "Who else?" I asked, suddenly apprehensive about the number of people I'd be facing. "Just my associate, Diane," Marcus assured me. "She's taken the lead on researching the property law aspects of this case." I nodded, squaring my shoulders. "Let's go." The conference room was spacious and bright, with large windows overlooking the river. 4 people sat around the polished oak table, a middle-aged couple I assumed were the Templetons, a sharp-featured woman in a navy suit who could only be their attorney, and a younger woman with sleek dark hair whom Marcus introduced as Diane, his associate. "Mrs. Blackwood," Marcus announced as we entered, "may I present Jeffrey and Catherine Templeton and their attorney, Ms. Abigail Frost. This is my client, Eleanor Blackwood, the legal owner of the property in question." I noted he didn't mention my stroke or health status. Another deliberate choice I appreciated. I was here as a property owner defending my rights, not as a patient or victim. The Templetons regarded me with barely concealed surprise. Perhaps they'd expected someone more, visibly incapacitated, someone who would validate their narrative that I was incompetent to make my own decisions. "Mrs. Blackwood," Jeffrey Templeton began, his tone carefully modulated to project reasonable concern. "We're truly sorry about your health difficulties. We had no idea the circumstances surrounding the sale were irregular. Yet here we are," their attorney interjected smoothly, "dealing with significant financial and emotional costs due to those irregularities. My clients put their own home on the market based on assurances from your children that the purchase of your property was proceeding normally. They've incurred moving expenses, storage fees, and temporary housing costs, not to mention the stress of this situation." Marcus opened a folder, his manner unhurried. "Before we address those claims, let's clarify the legal standing of the attempted sale. Diane, would you please summarize your findings?" The young associate nodded and consulted her notes. The power of attorney document executed by Mrs. Blackwood granted her children authority to make financial and medical decisions in the event of her incapacity. However, it did not specifically authorize the sale of her primary residence without her explicit consent, which would have required additional documentation under state law. Furthermore, Marcus added, Mrs. Blackwood's medical team has confirmed that while she experienced physical limitations following her stroke, her cognitive functions and decision-making capacity remained intact. She was never legally deemed incapacitated in a way that would trigger the broader powers under the POA. Abigail Frost's expression tightened. Yet her children clearly believed they were acting within their authority. My clients relied on that representation in good faith. This was the moment I'd prepared for. I leaned forward slightly, making eye contact with the Templetons directly. "Not Children's House to sell," I said, my words measured and deliberate. Never gave permission. Never asked. I tapped my temple with my left hand. Mine still works. Stroke took words, not thoughts. Catherine Templeton's composure faltered slightly. She glanced at her husband, then back at me. Mrs. Blackwood, we understand this is difficult. But we're victims here too. We love your house. It's exactly what we've been searching for. And now we're in limbo. Our own home sold, living in a short-term rental. Sympathy for situation, I acknowledged, but not my doing. Jeffrey Templeton leaned forward, his expression hardening. With all due respect, Mrs. Blackwood, your children indicated you were permanently moving to assisted living. They showed us your medical reports, or at least portions of them, suggesting your condition was unlikely to improve sufficiently for independent living. A surge of anger rushed through me at this confirmation of how thoroughly my children had violated my privacy and autonomy. I gripped my cane tighter, using the physical sensation to ground myself. They were wrong, I said simply. Not their decision-make. Abigail Frost shuffled her papers, clearly regrouping. Be that as it may, there's still the matter of damages. My clients have suffered real financial harm and significant inconvenience. We're prepared to file suit if necessary, but we'd prefer to reach a reasonable settlement. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. And what exactly would you consider reasonable, Ms. Frost? Full reimbursement of all expenses related to the aborted purchase, plus compensation for the increased housing costs they're now facing in this market. We estimate the total at approximately $75,000. I nearly choked at the figure. Marcus remained impassive, but I could sense his controlled outrage in the slight tightening of his jaw. That's quite a sum for a sale that never legally occurred, he observed mildly, especially considering my client was the victim of actions taken without her knowledge or consent. We're not unsympathetic to Mrs. Blackwood's situation, Jeffrey, Templeton insisted, but someone needs to take responsibility for this mess. I looked at the couple across the table, really looked at them, their expensive clothes, their air of entitlement, their assumption that their inconvenience deserved five-figure compensation. And in that moment, something crystallized within me. A clarity, a resolve that had been building since I first discovered my children's betrayal. Responsibility, I repeated, the word coming out clear and strong. Yes, important concept. I turned to Marcus. May I? He nodded, recognizing my intention to speak at length. I took a deep breath, focusing on forming each word as distinctly as possible. My children exceeded authority, made decisions not theirs make, violated my privacy sharing medical information. Those actions wrong and hurtful, but they not in this room today. I paused, gathering my thoughts and strength for what I needed to say next. You dealing with me now. Eleanor Blackwood, stroke survivor, homeowner, woman who knows her rights. I pointed to the stack of papers on the table. Those contracts invalid. House never for sale. You want sue someone? Sue my children who misled you. Not me. The room fell silent. The Templetons stared at me, clearly taken aback by my directness and clarity of purpose. I am sorry for your situation, I continued, my voice steady despite the effort each sentence required. But that house my home for 40 years. Place, I raised children, buried husband, planted garden. Not just property to me, it's my life. Catherine Templeton's expression softened slightly. We understand that, Mrs. Blackwood. Perhaps we could discuss a delayed sale. Once you've had more time to recover and make arrangements. I shook my head firmly. Not selling. Not now. Not later. My decision. Final. Jeffrey Templeton's frustration broke through his polished veneer. This is absurd. We've wasted weeks on this purchase. Our belongings are in storage. Our children were registered for the Riverside School District, all because your family assured us this was a done deal. Mr. Templeton, Marcus interjected. Smoothly, I understand your frustration, but directing it at my client is neither productive nor appropriate. As Mrs. Blackwood has made clear, she was not party to those assurances. Abigail Frost leaned toward her clients, whispering something. That caused Jeffrey to sit back, visibly trying to control his temper. She then turned to us with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Perhaps we could take a short break? I'd like to confer with my clients privately. Marcus agreed, and he helped me to a small adjoining office where I could rest during the recess. As soon as the door closed behind us, he broke into a broad smile. Ellie, that was magnificent, he said warmly. You couldn't have been clearer or more compelling. I sank gratefully into a comfortable chair, suddenly aware of how much energy the confrontation had required. Think it made difference? Absolutely, Marcus assured me. The Templetons came in expecting to intimidate what they assumed would be a frail, confused woman who would be eager to settle. Instead, they found themselves facing someone formidable and absolutely certain of her position. He chuckled. The look on Jeffrey's face when you told him to sue your children instead, priceless. I managed a small smile, though guilt immediately followed. Despite everything, Michael and Rebecca were still my children. Suggesting they bear the legal consequences of their actions was necessary but not easy. What happens now? I asked. Marcus settled into the chair opposite mine. My guess? They'll come back with a significantly reduced settlement demand. They know their legal position is weak. They're just hoping to recoup some of their expenses. And if we refuse? They could file suit, but it would likely be dismissed fairly quickly. They had no valid contract with you, and they should have done more due diligence before taking actions based on representations from your children. I nodded, processing this information. What would you advise? Marcus considered for a moment. From a strictly legal perspective, you owe them nothing. But offering a small gesture of goodwill, perhaps covering their actual out-of-pocket expenses for the home inspection and application fees, maybe $2,000 total, could bring this matter to a clean close. Not $75,000, I said with a wry smile. Definitely not, Marcus agreed emphatically. 20 minutes later, we reconvened in the conference room. The Templetons looked considerably less confident than before, and their attorney's manner had become more conciliatory. After discussing the situation, Abigail began, my clients are willing to reduce their settlement request to $25,000, which represents only their direct expenses related to this transaction. Marcus raised an eyebrow skeptically. Perhaps you could itemize those direct expenses for us? What followed was a rather strained presentation of costs that seemed inflated at best and fabricated at worst. Storage fees for 3 months in advance, luxury temporary housing, even the cost of a trip they'd taken to Europe to reduce their stress while waiting for the closing. When they finished, Marcus slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Here is our counteroffer. Mrs. Blackwood will cover the documented costs of the home inspection, application fees, and reasonable attorney's fees related specifically to the purchase contract. The total comes to $2,250. Jeffrey Templeton flushed with anger. This is insulting. You can't seriously expect— It's more than fair, Marcus interrupted smoothly. In fact, it's generous, considering my client had no legal obligation whatsoever in this matter. We could take this to court, Abigail warned, though I detected uncertainty in her tone. You could, Marcus agreed pleasantly. But I doubt any judge would look favorably on claims against a stroke survivor whose home was nearly sold without her knowledge or consent, especially given the clear limitations of the power of attorney in question. A tense silence followed. Catherine Templeton whispered something to her husband, who shook his head sharply before turning back to us. 5,000, he countered, and we want a written statement acknowledging that we acted in good faith based on representations from Mrs. Blackwood's children. I looked at Marcus, who gave me a slight nod, indicating the offer was reasonable if I wanted to accept it. 3,000, I said clearly, and statement that says we both acted good faith. No blame. The Templetons exchanged glances, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, 3,000 and a mutual statement of good faith. We just want this ordeal behind us. As does Mrs. Blackwood, Marcus replied, signaling to Diane to draft the necessary paperwork. An hour later, the agreement was signed. The Templetons left without further conversation, their disappointment and lingering resentment palpable. As soon as they were gone, I sagged in my chair, suddenly exhausted. You did wonderfully, Ellie, Marcus said, genuine admiration in his voice. Not many people could have handled that confrontation with such poise, especially after what you've been through. Thank you for support, I replied sincerely. Not just legal, believing in me. Marcus's expression softened. I've known you for over 30 years, Ellie. Stroke or no stroke, you're still the same determined woman who marched into my office decades ago to make sure Thomas's life insurance policy was ironclad because, as you put it, no one's going to deny my children's security if something happens. The memory brought tears to my eyes. I had been so focused on protecting my children then, the same children who had nearly stripped me of my own security now. They know about meeting? I asked, referring to Michael and Rebecca. I informed them it was taking place, yes. They wanted to attend, but I advised against it. This needed to be directly between you and the Templetons. I nodded, relieved that Marcus had managed that potential complication. The last thing I needed was Michael and Rebecca present for a confrontation centered on their unauthorized actions. Ready, go home now, I said, fatigue evident in my increasingly slurred speech. Been long day. Marcus personally escorted me back to Walter in the waiting car, his gentle support a reminder of how much I valued our long association. Before I got into the car, he handed me a sealed envelope. The updated will and trust documents you requested, he explained. Review them when you're rested, and we can discuss any changes next week. I tucked the envelope into my purse, thanked him again, and settled into the car for the ride home. As Walter navigated the early afternoon traffic, I found myself reflecting on the meeting. Standing up to the Templetons had been empowering, yes, but also illuminating. For the first time since the stroke, I had fully embraced my new reality. Not as a diminished version of my former self, but as someone different yet equally determined, equally worthy of respect and autonomy. When I arrived home, I was surprised to find Michael's car in the driveway. Laura met me at the door, looking slightly apologetic. He showed up about an hour ago, she explained quietly. Said he needed to talk to you about something important. I told him you were out, but he insisted on waiting. My fatigue instantly doubled at the prospect of another emotional confrontation. Where is he? In the kitchen. I made him help. Prepare lunch, Laura added with a small smile. I made my way slowly down the hallway, each step requiring more effort than usual after the strain of the meeting. When I entered the kitchen, I found Michael standing at the counter, awkwardly, assembling sandwiches under Laura's distant supervision. He looked up as I entered, his expression a complex mix of concern, embarrassment, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Perhaps respect. Mom, he said, setting down the knife he'd been using to spread mayonnaise. How did the meeting go? I eased myself into a chair at the kitchen table, placing my cane carefully against the edge. Productive. Matter settled. $3,000 covers their actual expenses. Michael's eyebrows shot up. 3,000? They were asking for 75,000 when I spoke to their lawyer last week. Meeting them in person made difference, I said simply. Seeing me, hearing me, understanding this my home, my choice. A flush crept up Michael's neck. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. It should have been my responsibility to clean up the mess I created. Yes, I agreed, not softening the truth. Should have been. Laura quietly placed a glass of water and my medication on the table before tactfully excusing herself, leaving Michael and me alone in the kitchen. He finished making the sandwiches in silence, then brought 2 plates to the table, sitting across from me. "Marcus called me after the meeting," he said finally. "He said you were impressive. That you made it absolutely clear the house was never for sale and never would be." I nodded, taking a small bite of the sandwich. I was hungry after the morning's exertions, but eating remained a conscious effort, requiring concentration, to coordinate swallowing safely. "The trust documents," Michael continued, his voice carefully neutral. "The ones that specify weekly visits, family therapy, volunteer work. I've been thinking about those conditions a lot." "And?" I prompted, when he paused. "At first I was angry. It felt like you were treating us like children, using your money to force us into a relationship on your terms." He set down his sandwich, meeting my eyes directly. "But after today, hearing how you stood up to the Templetons, insisted on your right to determine your own future, I'm starting to understand it differently." I waited, giving him space to find his way to whatever realization was forming. "You're not using the trust to control us," he said slowly. "You're using it to teach us something we should already know, something about respect and agency and I'm seeing people for who they are, not who we assume them to be." "Yes," I said simply, touched by his insight. Michael looked down at his barely touched lunch. "I've volunteered at the stroke center twice now. Just basic stuff, helping with paperwork, serving coffee during support group meetings. But it's eye-opening. These people aren't just patients or statistics. They're engineers and teachers and grandparents with full lives and opinions, and hopes despite their limitations." "Like me," I observed. "Like you," he agreed, his voice roughening with emotion. "Mom, I don't know if you can ever fully forgive what Rebecca and I tried to do, but I want you to know I'm starting to understand why it was so wrong, and I'm trying to change, not just to satisfy the trust conditions, but because I need to be better than I was." It was the most honest conversation we'd had since the stroke, perhaps in years. The wall of professional distance Michael had built around himself seemed to have cracked, allowing me a glimpse of the uncertain, seeking person beneath the polished exterior. "Good beginning," I said, reaching across the table to briefly touch his hand. "Takes time, for both of us." We ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then Michael cleared his throat, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "There's something else I need to tell you. It's about Rebecca." My stomach tightened with apprehension. "What about her?" "She's not handling all this as well as it might seem. Philip says she's barely sleeping, constantly anxious. Her boss called me yesterday, concerned about her performance at work." Michael hesitated. "I think she's truly devastated by what happened. Not just the practical fallout, but the realization of how deeply she hurt you." I absorbed this information, my heart aching despite everything. Rebecca had always been my more sensitive child, though she'd worked hard to develop a polished professional veneer that disguised her emotional vulnerability. If she was struggling visibly enough for her workplace to notice, the situation was serious indeed. "She hasn't said anything during visits," I observed. Rebecca had been coming by regularly, helping in the garden or bringing small gifts, her way of trying to make amends without directly addressing the emotional chasm between us. "She wouldn't," Michael replied. "You know Rebecca. She'd rather suffer in silence than admit she's not coping, but Philip is worried about her. And honestly, so am I." I sighed deeply, conflicted between my lingering hurt and my instinctive concern as a mother. "What you suggesting I do?" Michael shook his head quickly. Nothing really. I just thought you should know. This isn't just hard on you, it's hard on her too. Different way, different reasons, but still hard. I nodded slowly, processing his words. Thank you for telling me. We'll think about it. After lunch, Michael helped me to the sunroom, where I often rested in the afternoons. Before leaving, he hesitated in the doorway, clearly wanting to say something more. The volunteer coordinator at the stroke center mentioned they're looking for someone to help with their communication skills group, he said tentatively, given your background as an English teacher. Well, I thought maybe someday when you're stronger you might consider it. Some of the patients are really struggling to relearn reading and writing. I was touched by the suggestion, not just because it indicated Michael was thinking about my recovery in a more positive light, but because it acknowledged my identity beyond stroke survivor. I was still a teacher at heart, still someone with valuable skills to share. Might do that? I agreed, when stronger. After Michael left, I opened the envelope Marcus had given me, reviewing the updated legal documents with careful attention. The will, the trust conditions, the advance directive, all reflected my wishes exactly as I'd outlined them. I signed where indicated, making my intentions official. Later that evening, just as Laura and I were finishing dinner, the doorbell rang. Laura went to answer it and returned with Rebecca, looking pale and drawn in the fading light. I'm sorry. To drop by unannounced, she said, hovering uncertainly near the table. I can come back tomorrow if this isn't a good time. It's fine, I assured her, gesturing to the empty chair. Join us. Tea? Rebecca sat, declining the offer with a small shake of her head. Up close, the signs of strain were even more evident. Shadows beneath her eyes, tension around her mouth, a general air of exhaustion that makeup couldn't quite conceal. I heard about the meeting with the Templetons, she began, twisting her wedding ring nervously. Michael said you were amazing. Wasn't trying be amazing, I replied honestly. Just clear about what matters. Rebecca nodded, still not meeting my eyes directly. That's what I want to talk about, actually. What matters? She took a deep breath as if gathering courage. I've been doing a lot of thinking since everything happened. About why I reacted the way I did, why I made the choices I made. Laura quietly excused herself, leaving us to talk privately. I waited, giving Rebecca space to continue at her own pace. When Dad died, she said, finally, I was terrified that I'd lose you too. Not immediately, but gradually. That's what happened with Grandma Jenkins, remember? First the little memory lapses, then the bigger ones, then the fall that landed her in the nursing home. Rebecca's voice caught. By the end, she didn't even know who I was anymore. I remembered all too well. Thomas's mother had suffered from advancing dementia in her final years, her vibrant personality slowly erased until only a fragile shell remained. The experience had been devastating for the entire family, especially Rebecca, who had been particularly close to her grandmother. Your stroke, Rebecca continued softly. It triggered all those old fears. The doctors were talking about brain damage, about permanent disability. All I could think was that I was losing you. If not physically, then the essence of you. The mom I've known all my life. So you started planning, I supplied, understanding dawning, taking control before things could fall apart. Rebecca nodded miserably. I convinced myself I was being practical, responsible, but really I was just terrified, and that fear made me do things I'm deeply ashamed of now. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she brushed them away impatiently. I know saying sorry isn't enough. Actions matter more than words. That's why I've started seeing a therapist on my own, even before the family sessions required by the trust. I need to understand why I responded the way I did, so I never do anything like that again, to you or anyone else. The genuine remorse in her voice touched me deeply. This wasn't the polished professional apology she'd offered in the garden weeks ago, but something rawer, more honest, a true recognition of the harm she'd caused. Fear, powerful emotion, I said gently, makes us strangers to ourselves sometimes. That's exactly it, Rebecca agreed, looking relieved at my understanding. I became someone I don't recognize or like very much, but I want you to know I'm working to find my way back, not to who I was before, because that person was still capable of making those terrible decisions, but to someone better. Someone worthy of being your daughter again. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. Already my daughter, I said firmly. Always will be. What changes now is how we understand each other, how we rebuild trust. Rebecca squeezed my hand, fresh tears falling. I don't deserve your grace, Mom. Not after what I did. Not about deserving, I replied. About choosing to move forward, together. As Rebecca's tears subsided, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in the week since my stroke. The relationships I had taken for granted had been tested, some breaking under pressure, others proving surprisingly resilient. My children, whom I thought I knew completely, had revealed aspects of themselves, both troubling and hopeful, that I had never fully seen before. And I myself had discovered a strength and clarity of purpose that perhaps had always been within me, waiting for circumstances dire enough to bring it forth. The road ahead would not be easy. My recovery would continue to be measured in small victories and inevitable setbacks. The trust I had placed in my children could not be instantly restored, despite their genuine remorse. The family therapy sessions would likely uncover more painful truths before healing could truly begin. But for the first time since waking in that hospital bed, I felt something beyond determination, beyond the simple will to survive and recover. I felt hope, not just for my physical rehabilitation, but for the possibility of relationships renewed, on more honest, equal terms. For a future where I was seen and respected not despite my limitations, but as a complete person, changed, but not diminished by what had happened. As Rebecca prepared to leave that evening, she paused at the door. Michael mentioned the communication skills group at the stroke center, she said hesitantly. I think it's a wonderful idea. Your students always loved you. You have a gift for teaching that a stroke can't take away. I smiled, touched by her encouragement. Considering it, when stronger? You're already stronger than any of us realized, Rebecca replied softly. That's the lesson here, isn't it? After she left, I made my way slowly to the downstairs bedroom, contemplating her words. Strength came in many forms, I was learning. There was the physical strength I was gradually rebuilding through therapy. There was the mental fortitude required to face each frustrating day of limited speech and mobility. There was the emotional resilience needed to work through betrayal toward forgiveness. But perhaps most important was the strength to redefine myself in the wake of profound change, to accept what was lost while embracing what remained and what might yet be discovered. That was the hidden strength I hadn't known I possessed until circumstances forced me to find it. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about the communication skills group at the stroke center. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday soon, I would be ready to step into a classroom again. Not as the teacher I once was, but as someone with a different kind of wisdom to share. Someone who understood firsthand the struggle to find one's voice after it had been taken away. The thought brought a smile to my lips as sleep claimed me. This was not the life I had planned, but it was still my life to live, my story to write, one halting word at a time. Summer faded into autumn, painting my garden in russet and gold as the maple trees shed their leaves across the lawn. 3 months had passed since my return home, and my recovery continued its uneven path forward. Some days brought noticeable improvements, a steadier gait, a more fluid sentence, fingers that could finally button my own cardigan again. Other days felt like sliding backward, my speech more slurred, my right side heavier and less cooperative. Dr. Whitman had warned me about this pattern. Recovery isn't linear, she explained during one of my checkups. It's more like the stock market, general upward trend over time, but with plenty of dips and plateaus along the way. I was learning to measure progress not in days, but in weeks, celebrating the small victories and trying not to dwell on the frustrations. Today had been a good day. My morning therapy session had gone well, with Grace expressing genuine pleasure at my improved balance. I had managed to prepare a simple lunch for myself without assistance, and my afternoon had been spent pleasantly repotting some houseplants with Laura, our conversation flowing more naturally than it had in weeks. As I sat on the porch enjoying the crisp October air, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since those first desperate days after the stroke. The house around me had gradually transformed to accommodate my new needs. Grab bars in strategic locations, a stair lift installed for accessing the second floor, pathways widened for easier navigation with my cane. Yet it remained unmistakably my home, filled with memories and the accumulated treasures of a lifetime. My relationships, too, had undergone transformation. Laura had settled comfortably into the garage apartment, her presence a reassuring constant without being intrusive. The neighbors continued their rotation of support, though I needed less practical assistance now than in those first weeks. And my children, Michael and Rebecca, were keeping their promises, visiting weekly, attending the family therapy sessions, volunteering at the stroke center as the trust required. Those therapy sessions had been difficult, often painfully so. Under the guidance of Dr. Taylor West, a skilled family therapist Marcus had recommended, we had begun excavating decades of unspoken expectations, misunderstandings, and assumptions. Michael's emotional distance, Rebecca's anxious, controlling tendencies, my own reluctance to acknowledge vulnerability, all were gradually being exposed and examined. Progress was slow but undeniable. Last week, for the first time, Michael had arrived for his visit without calling ahead to confirm, simply showing up with takeout Chinese food and a casual, "Thought you might be tired of cooking." It was a small gesture but significant, a step toward the easy familiarity we had lost somewhere along the way. Rebecca, too, was changing. Her initial desperate attempts to make amends through extravagant gifts and excessive helpfulness had gradually given way to something more genuine, sitting quietly with me while I struggled through speech exercises, sharing her own vulnerabilities instead of maintaining the perfect facade she typically presented to the world. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted my reflections. I wasn't expecting visitors this afternoon. Through the maple trees, I glimpsed an unfamiliar sedan parking behind Laura's compact car. A woman emerged, tall, professionally dressed, with a portfolio tucked under her arm. Something about her purposeful stride toward my front gate set alarm bells ringing in my mind. I reached for my cane, preparing to stand if necessary, but remained seated as she approached the porch steps. Up close, she appeared to be in her early 50s, with sharp features and shrewd eyes that assessed me with unconcealed curiosity. "Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood?" she inquired, her tone politely professional. I nodded, studying her with equal curiosity. "Yes, who asking?" "My name is Vanessa Carling. I'm a reporter with the Riverside Chronicle, working on a series about elder rights and family decision-making." She gestured toward the empty chair beside me. "May I join you? I'd like to discuss your recent experience with medical recovery and autonomy." I tensed involuntarily. Though my speech had improved considerably over the past months, I remained self-conscious about my halting patterns, especially with strangers. And more concerning, how had this woman learned about my private family situation? "How know about me?" I asked directly. Vanessa Carling smiled, not warmly, but with professional efficiency. "Legal proceedings are public record, Mrs. Blackwood. Your case with the Templetons caught my attention during routine research. When I looked deeper, I discovered the fascinating background: a stroke patient whose children attempted to sell her home without consent, who then fought back through innovative legal means. She pulled a small recorder from her pocket. Your story could help countless other families navigate these complex waters. Would you be willing to share your experience for our readers? Before I could respond, the front door opened behind me, and Laura stepped onto the porch, her expression guarded as she assessed the visitor. "Everything okay out here, Ellie?" she asked, her tone casual but her posture protective. "Reporter," I explained, nodding toward Vanessa. "Wants interview about stroke, house, children?" Laura's eyebrows shot up. "I see. And she called ahead to schedule this interview, I assume." Vanessa had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. In my experience, formal requests are often intercepted by family members or caregivers who prefer these stories remain untold." "Or perhaps," Laura suggested mildly, "people value their privacy and don't want their personal medical situations splashed across the local newspaper." Vanessa turned her attention back to me, effectively dismissing Laura's concern. "Mrs. Blackwood, your situation raises important questions about elder rights, medical decision-making, and family dynamics. Would you be willing to tell your story in your own words? It could help others in similar situations." I considered her request carefully. There was merit in her argument. My experience might indeed provide valuable insights for others facing similar challenges. Yet the thought of publicly exposing the painful breach with my children, who were now working so hard to repair the damage, gave me pause. "Need think about it," I said finally. "Not today." Vanessa looked disappointed but pressed on smoothly. "I understand your hesitation. Perhaps we could start with just the facts already in public record. Your stroke, the attempted sale of your home, the legal resolution with the Templetons." Her persistence was beginning to annoy me. "Said need time," I repeated more firmly. "Please respect that." "Of course," she conceded, though reluctance was evident in her tone. She placed a business card on the small table between us. "When you're ready to talk, please call me. Stories like yours are powerful tools for change, Mrs. Blackwood." After she left, Laura and I exchanged concerned glances. "How much damage could she do?" Laura asked quietly. "If she publishes something based just on the public records?" I shook my head, uncertain. "Call Marcus," I decided. "Need legal advice." Marcus was alarmed by the reporter's visit. "This complicates things," he admitted when he called back that evening. "While the settlement with the Templetons is indeed public record, the details are minimal. But if she starts digging, interviewing neighbors, maybe even approaching your children, the story could become more invasive." "Options?" I asked, keeping my question simple to avoid the speech frustration that still sometimes overtook me during stressful conversations. "We could issue a brief statement through my office, acknowledging the legal matter was resolved, but declining further comment on what we'll characterize as a private family health situation," Marcus suggested. "That might satisfy her enough to move on to other stories." "Or make more curious," I countered. "That's a risk," Marcus acknowledged. "The other option is to control the narrative by giving her a limited interview on your terms, focusing on the legal and medical aspects rather than the personal family dynamics." I sighed, wishing this complication hadn't arisen just as things were beginning to stabilize with Michael and Rebecca. "Need talk to children first," I decided. "Their reputations too." "A wise approach," Marcus agreed. "Would you like me to arrange a family meeting at my office?" Neutral territory might be beneficial for this discussion. The following afternoon found the four of us, Michael, Rebecca, Marcus, and myself, gathered around the conference table in Marcus's office. I had deliberately arrived early to collect my thoughts and prepare what I wanted to say. When my children arrived, I was struck by the contrast in their demeanors. Michael looked tense but composed, his professional armor firmly in place. Rebecca appeared actively distressed, her usual polished appearance slightly disheveled, as if she'd dressed in haste. Marcus efficiently outlined the situation with the reporter, explaining the potential implications of a published story about our family situation. While we can't prevent her from writing about the public aspects of this case, we can influence how the story is framed, he concluded. Michael leaned forward, his expression hardening. This is outrageous. Our family's private medical matters aren't news. Can't we get some kind of injunction? Freedom of the press, I reminded him gently. Public records. Mom's right, Marcus confirmed. We can't legally prevent reporting on matters of public record. The question is how to respond. Rebecca had remained silent, her gaze fixed on her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Now she looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. This is my fault, she said quietly. If I hadn't pushed so hard to sell the house quickly, if I'd just waited until you were stable enough to participate in the decision. Not productive, I interrupted her self-recrimination firmly. Past is past. Need focus on now. Marcus nodded approvingly. Eleanor's right. The question before us is straightforward. Do we issue a brief no-comment statement and hope the story dies from lack of oxygen, or do we engage on limited terms to shape the narrative? Michael's jaw tightened. I vote for no comment. Engaging with this reporter only legitimizes her intrusion into our private affairs. Might backfire, I pointed out. Make her more determined. What do you want to do, Mom? Rebecca asked, finally meeting my eyes directly. It's your story, ultimately. Your privacy that's most at stake. Her willingness to defer to my preference, marked change from the controlling behavior that had precipitated our crisis, touched me deeply. 3 months ago, she would have insisted on managing the situation herself, convinced she knew best how to protect me. Think should talk to her, I said slowly. Limited interview. Focus on medical aspects, legal rights, not family conflict. Are you sure, Mom? Michael asked, looking concerned. These reporters can be manipulative. They ask seemingly innocent questions, then twist your words to create controversy. Not helpless, I reminded him, meeting his gaze steadily. Can handle reporter. Rebecca smiled slightly, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her since she arrived. You certainly handled the Templetons, she acknowledged, and us, for that matter. If we pursue the limited interview approach, Marcus interjected, returning us to the practical considerations, I would recommend having me present as your counsel, Eleanor. We can establish ground rules in advance, topics that are off limits, time constraints, the right to review quotes before publication. I nodded my agreement. Good plan. Michael still looked skeptical. And if this reporter ignores the ground, rules? If she publishes something damaging despite our precautions? Then we deal with consequences, I said pragmatically. Together. After further discussion, we reached a consensus. Marcus would contact Vanessa Carling to arrange a brief interview with strict parameters. I would focus on the medical and legal aspects of my experience, emphasizing the importance of patient autonomy and proper understanding of powers of attorney. Personal details about my children would remain off limits. As the meeting concluded, Rebecca lingered behind while Michael spoke privately with Marcus about some technical legal questions. I'm scared about this, Mom, she admitted quietly. Not just for my reputation, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't a concern. But mostly, I'm worried about you having to relive all of it. The shock of discovering what we'd done. The hurt and betrayal you must have felt. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Part of healing, I assured her. Telling story helps make sense of it. I hope so, she replied, though doubt lingered in her eyes. Just, Please don't push yourself too hard. Your recovery is more important than any newspaper article. Her genuine concern, focused on my well-being rather than her own comfort, was another small sign of the growth these difficult months had fostered. We'll be careful, I promised. 3 days later, Vanessa Carling arrived at my home precisely at the appointed time for our interview. Marcus was already there, having arrived early to review our strategy. We had agreed to conduct the interview in the sunroom, which offered comfortable seating and good lighting without revealing too much of my private living space. Vanessa seemed pleased that I had agreed to speak with her, though she eyed Marcus with undisguised wariness. I was hoping we could talk one-on-one, she commented as she set up her recorder. Sometimes legal counsel can inhibit an authentic conversation. Marcus stays, I said firmly. Terms of interview. She nodded, accepting this condition without further protest. Before we begin, Mrs. Blackwood, I want to thank you for sharing your story. It takes courage to speak publicly about such personal experiences. Have conditions, I reminded her. Medical and legal aspects only. No personal details about children. Understood, Vanessa agreed, though something in her expression suggested she hadn't entirely abandoned hope of extracting more intimate revelations. Shall we begin with the stroke itself? When did it happen, and what were your initial symptoms? Over the next hour, I carefully navigated her questions, describing my medical experience, the rehabilitation process, and the legal complications that arose from the attempted house sale. Marcus occasionally intervened when Vanessa's questions veered toward the more personal aspects we had declared off-limits, but for the most part, I managed the conversation myself. The most significant legal issue, I explained, concentrating on forming my words clearly, was misunderstanding of power of attorney. Many people don't realize limitations. Could you elaborate on that? Vanessa prompted, seeming genuinely interested in this aspect. Standard power of attorney doesn't automatically grant authority sell primary residence, I explained. Special provisions needed. Important people understand before signing. That's a crucial point, Marcus added. We see this misconception frequently in elder law. A power of attorney is not a blank check. It has specific limits and responsibilities attached. Vanessa nodded thoughtfully. And in your case, Mrs. Blackwood, the power of attorney was implemented while you were temporarily incapacitated by the stroke, but your cognitive functions remained intact. Exactly, I confirmed. Could think clearly. Just couldn't communicate effectively at first. That must have been incredibly frustrating, Vanessa observed, her tone softening with genuine empathy. Knowing what was happening but being unable to express your wishes. Most difficult part, I acknowledged. Why so important stroke patients have advocates who listen carefully, not just make assumptions. As the interview progressed, I found myself growing more comfortable, my speech flowing more naturally as I focused on the substantive issues rather than my own limitations. Vanessa proved to be a thoughtful interviewer, asking intelligent questions about patient rights and the medical system's approach to stroke recovery. One final question, if I may, she said as our agreed-upon hour drew to a close. What advice would you give to families facing a similar health crisis? How can they avoid the legal and emotional complications you experienced? I considered her question carefully, wanting my response to be both helpful and honest. Communication most important, I said finally. Not just talking, listening, seeing person, not just patient, respecting their wishes, even if different from what you would choose. And for the stroke survivors themselves? Vanessa asked. Patience, I replied with a small smile. With recovery, with family who may struggle understand, with self, most of all, and persistence. Keep fighting for voice, for independence, worth the effort. Vanessa turned off her recorder, looking genuinely thoughtful. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood. This has been illuminating and quite different from what I initially expected." "How so?" I asked, curious about her perception. "Frankly, I anticipated a more sensational story. Family betrayal, elder abuse, dramatic legal battles," she admitted candidly. "What I found instead was something more nuanced, a story about communication failures, fear-driven decisions, and, ultimately, reconciliation." "More common story," I suggested. "Less dramatic, more useful." "Perhaps you're right," Vanessa acknowledged, gathering her materials. "When would you be comfortable with publication? I'd like to fact-check a few medical details with your doctors first, with your permission, of course." Marcus and I exchanged glances. "We'll need to review the quotes you plan to use," he reminded her. "As agreed upon." "Of course," she assured. "Us. I'll email the relevant portions within the next few days. Assuming all goes smoothly with the review process, I'd aim to publish next week." After she left, Marcus helped me to my favorite armchair in the living room, where I could rest after the mental exertion of the interview. "You handled that beautifully, Ellie," he observed, his tone warm with admiration. Clear, focused, dignified. She came looking for scandal and found wisdom instead. I smiled, appreciating his encouragement but aware that the situation remained precarious. "Still concerned about publication," I admitted. "How children will handle public exposure." "They're stronger than you might think," Marcus suggested, gently. "This process has been difficult for all of you, but I've observed genuine growth, particularly in Rebecca. She's learning to balance her natural protective instincts with respect for your autonomy." "Progress," I agreed, "not perfection." The following week brought new challenges. True to her word, Vanessa sent the portions of the article that quoted me directly for our review. The content was fair and accurate, focusing on the medical and legal aspects as agreed. Marcus responded with only minor corrections to some technical details about the power of attorney provisions. 2 days before the expected publication date, I received unexpected visitors. Michael and Rebecca arrived together on a Wednesday afternoon, both appearing tense and preoccupied. "We need to talk to you about something, Mom," Michael began once we were settled in the living room. "It's about the newspaper article." My heart sank. "Problem with quotes?" I asked, concerned that Vanessa might have disregarded our agreement after all. "No, nothing like that," Rebecca assured me quickly. "It's actually—" She glanced at Michael, seemingly unsure how to continue. "We want to add our perspective to the article," Michael said bluntly. "We've contacted Ms. Carling and offered to provide brief statements to accompany your interview." I stared at them, taken aback by this unexpected development. "Why?" I asked simply. Rebecca leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Because letting you shoulder this alone feels wrong. The article presents your experience, which is valid and important, but it's not the complete picture. We made serious mistakes, Mom. Owning those mistakes publicly feels like the right thing to do." "Not necessary," I protested, concerned. "About the professional implications for both of them. Could harm your reputations, your careers." "Maybe," Michael acknowledged with a shrug that attempted casualness but didn't quite succeed. "But some things matter more than professional reputation, integrity for one, taking responsibility for our actions." I studied my children's faces, searching for signs of reluctance or resentment, finding instead a quiet determination that reminded me, suddenly and powerfully, of their father. Thomas had possessed that same stubborn integrity, that unwillingness to take the easier path when the harder one was right. "What plan to say?" I asked finally. They exchanged glances, and Rebecca withdrew a folded paper from her purse. We each wrote a brief statement. "Would you like to read them?" I accepted the paper, unfolding it carefully. Michael's statement came first. "Following my mother's stroke, I made decisions based on fear rather than facts, prioritizing what I thought was practical over what I knew was right. I failed to see my mother as a whole person beyond her medical condition. This experience has taught me valuable lessons about patient autonomy and the true meaning of respect that will inform my personal and professional life going forward. Rebecca's followed. When faced with my mother's stroke, I responded by trying to control everything, a reaction born of fear and a misguided belief that I knew what was best. In attempting to manage an uncertain future, I nearly destroyed what mattered most: my mother's dignity and our relationship. I'm grateful for the second chance to do better, to listen more than I speak, and to support without overstepping. The simplicity and honesty of their words brought tears to my eyes. There was no attempt at justification, no shifting of responsibility, just a straightforward acknowledgement of mistakes made and lessons learned. "These are good statements," I said, my voice rough with emotion, "but still worried about consequences for you." "Let us worry about that," Michael replied gently. "This is something we need to do, Mom. Not for you, not for the public, but for ourselves. It's part of making amends in a meaningful way." Rebecca nodded in agreement. "Besides, hiding from the truth only gives it power over us. Being open about our mistakes, that takes away the fear." I recognized in their determination a reflection of my own journey these past months. The gradual understanding that true healing required honesty, even when painful. That facing our vulnerabilities ultimately made us stronger, not weaker. "If certain this what you want," I said finally, "then support your decision." The article was published the following Sunday. Vanessa Carling had done a commendable job, focusing on the medical and legal aspects of my experience while treating the family dynamics with sensitivity. My quotes were presented accurately and in context, highlighting the importance of patient advocacy and clear communication during health crises. Michael and Rebecca's statements appeared in a sidebar, presented without editorial comment, their simple words more powerful for their brevity and directness. The overall effect was not the sensationalized exposé I had feared, but a thoughtful examination of how families navigate the complex terrain of serious illness and recovery. The response was immediate and unexpected. By Monday afternoon, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from stroke survivors and their families, each with their own stories of communication failures, misunderstandings, and struggles to maintain dignity amid medical crises. Many expressed gratitude for the article's nuanced portrayal of both the patient's perspective and the family member's challenges. Most surprising was the call from Dr. Whitman, my neurologist. "Your story has generated quite a buzz in medical circles," she informed me. "We're discussing using it as a case study for our resident training program, with your permission, of course. It highlights several critical issues in patient autonomy and family communication." Even more astonishing was the impact on Michael and Rebecca. Rather than the professional backlash they had feared, both received messages of support and respect from colleagues who appreciated their honesty and accountability. Rebecca's boss even suggested she might develop a specialized marketing approach for medical practices focused on patient-centered communication, turning her painful experience into a professional asset. 2 weeks after the article's publication, Grace arrived for my physical therapy session with unexpected news. "The director of the stroke center wants to meet you," she announced as she helped me through my stretching routine. "She read the article and was impressed by your perspective on patient advocacy. She's wondering if you might be interested in consulting on a new program they're developing." "Consulting?" I echoed, surprised by the suggestion. "In what capacity?" "They're creating educational materials for families of stroke patients," Grace explained. "Guidelines for communication, decision-making, that sort of thing. They want input from someone who's lived the experience from both sides, as a stroke survivor and as a parent whose relationships were affected by the recovery process." The idea was intriguing. using my experience, both the painful parts and the healing journey, to help other families avoid similar pitfalls, creating something meaningful from what had nearly broken us. Interested, I told Grace decisively. Set up meeting. That evening, as Laura and I shared dinner on the porch, enjoying the mild autumn evening, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected turns my life had taken since that day in the garden when everything changed. The stroke had taken much from me: physical abilities, fluency of speech, the easy confidence of moving through the world without conscious effort. But it had given me something too, a clarity about what truly mattered, a deeper understanding of my own strength, and ultimately a more honest relationship with my children. "You're smiling," Laura observed, pouring us each a small glass of wine, a treat Dr. Whitman had recently declared acceptable in moderation. "Good thoughts?" "Thinking about article," I explained. All that followed, how something painful became useful. Laura nodded thoughtfully. "There's a concept in Japanese art, kintsugi. When pottery breaks, they repair it with gold. The cracks become part of the piece's history, something to highlight rather than hide. The object becomes more valuable for having been broken and mended. Like people," I suggested. "Like families." "Exactly like that," Laura agreed, raising her glass in a small toast. "To golden repairs." I clinked my glass against hers, grateful for her friendship, for the home I had fought to keep, for the family that was slowly rebuilding itself in new patterns. The road ahead would still have challenges. My recovery would continue to have setbacks along with progress. The family therapy sessions would uncover more difficult truths. The new consulting opportunity would test my still limited stamina. But for now, sitting on my porch as the setting sun painted the maple trees gold, I felt a deep sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, it was far from that, but because I had discovered a fundamental truth: that being seen and heard for who I truly am, limitations and all, was the foundation upon which everything else could be rebuilt. The person I was before the stroke was gone, replaced by someone more vulnerable in some ways but stronger in others. The relationships I had taken for granted had been tested, broken, and were now being carefully reconstructed with greater awareness and respect on all sides. And the future, once so carefully planned and predictable, now stretched before me. As an open question, uncertain, yes, but also full of unexpected possibilities. As darkness fell and lights began to glow in neighboring windows, I savored this moment of quiet contentment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for misunderstanding and reconciliation, new tests of our family's fragile new patterns. But tonight, it was enough to sit here, present in this moment, aware of how far we had come and how much further we might yet go, together. Spring arrived in a riot of color 6 months after the newspaper article was published. My garden bloomed again, tulips and daffodils pushing through soil I had prepared with my own hands, slowly, painstakingly, but with growing confidence in my recovering abilities. The cherry tree by the side fence exploded in pale pink blossoms, its beauty more poignant now that I understood how quickly life could change, how precious each season truly was. The consulting work with the Stroke Center had blossomed as well, expanding beyond initial expectations. What began as occasional input on educational materials had evolved into a formal patient advocacy program, with me as its first coordinator. 3 mornings each week, I worked alongside medical professionals, sharing my perspective and helping bridge the communication gap between patients, families, and healthcare providers. My speaking had improved dramatically, though certain words still eluded me in moments of fatigue or stress. The persistent weakness in my right hand meant I now typed with deliberate care rather than the rapid-fire pace of my teaching days. But these adaptations had become part of my new normal, accommodations rather than limitations. Today was special, the first annual family communication workshop at Riverside Rehabilitation Center, an event I had helped develop over the past several months. As I reviewed my notes for the presentation, I heard familiar voices in the hallway outside the conference room. Michael entered first, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in years. The corporate facade had softened, replaced by something more authentic. Behind him came Rebecca, carrying a large box of printed materials we would distribute to participants. "Everything's set up in the main room," she reported, setting down her load. "We've got 35 registered attendees, a full house." "Nervous?" Michael asked, noting my fingers tapping against my note cards. I smiled, acknowledging the flutter of anxiety in my chest. "A little. Different from teaching high school." "You'll be brilliant," Rebecca assured me, straightening the scarf around my neck with a gentle touch that held none of her former controlling anxiety. "Nobody knows this subject better than you do." The workshop went better than I had dared. "Sir," I opened with my story, not just the medical details of the stroke or the legal battle over my home, but the emotional journey of feeling erased by those closest to me. Michael and Rebecca then shared their perspectives, speaking candidly about fear-driven decisions and the hard lessons they had learned. The participants, a mix of stroke survivors, family members, and healthcare professionals, listened intently, many nodding in recognition. During the discussion session that followed, stories poured out, tales of miscommunication, of well-meaning actions that caused harm, of the struggle to maintain dignity amid physical limitations. The hardest part wasn't the physical challenges, one woman admitted, her husband nodding beside her. It was feeling invisible, having people talk about me rather than to me. "As a son," another participant shared, "I thought I was protecting my father by taking over everything. I never considered I might be taking away the control he still needed." By day's end, I was exhausted, but deeply satisfied. We had created a space for honest conversation, for naming the difficult truths that often remained unspoken during medical crises. More importantly, we had offered practical tools for navigating these complex waters, communication strategies, legal considerations, and emotional support resources. As the last participants departed, Dr. Whitman approached me, her expression warm with approval. "You've started something important here, Eleanor," she said, "something that will help countless families. The medical community focuses so intently on physical recovery that we sometimes overlook the relational healing that's equally crucial." Later that evening, Michael and Rebecca joined Laura and me for dinner in my garden, now illuminated by strings of tiny lights that Michael had installed the previous weekend. As we shared the meal, conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by laughter that would have seemed impossible during those dark days after my stroke. When Michael raised his glass in a toast, his voice held none of its former reserve. "To Mom," he said simply, "who taught us the hardest and most important lesson, that love without respect isn't really love at all." Rebecca added softly, "And to second chances for all of us." As twilight deepened around us, I looked at my children, really looked at them, and saw not just who they had been or who they were now, but who they were becoming. Michael had recently begun volunteering with a financial literacy program for seniors, using his expertise to help others avoid exploitation. Rebecca had shifted her marketing focus toward healthcare communication, translating complex medical information into accessible formats for patients and families. The trust conditions I had established all those months ago, weekly visits, therapy sessions, volunteer work, were technically fulfilled now. Yet they continued to visit, not from obligation, but from genuine desire for connection. The therapy had revealed deep-rooted patterns that would require ongoing attention, but we were facing them together, with honesty and growing compassion. As for me, I had discovered a new purpose in this unexpected chapter of life. The woman I had been, the English teacher, the gardener, the mother who sacrificed without question, still existed within me. But alongside her stood someone new, an advocate who understood firsthand how easily voices could be silenced and how vital it was to ensure they were heard. My home remained my sanctuary, adapted now to my needs, but still unmistakably mine. Laura's presence in the garage apartment had evolved into a friendship deeper than either of us had anticipated. Our lives intertwined through daily rituals and mutual support. The maple tree outside my bedroom window had weathered another winter and emerged stronger, its new leaves unfurling with the promise of summer ahead. Like that tree, I had been altered by forces beyond my control, bent but not broken, changed but still firmly rooted in what mattered most. As night fell completely and stars appeared above my garden, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because my journey was over. Recovery would continue. Relationships would require ongoing nurturing. New challenges would inevitably arise. But because I had reclaimed what once seemed lost, my voice, my agency, my place in the world, the stroke had taken much from me, yes, but it had also revealed strengths I never knew I possessed and truths about my family that, though painful to discover, had ultimately led to deeper, more authentic connections. In losing what I thought was certain, I had found something more valuable, the courage to insist on being truly seen, and the wisdom to recognize that vulnerability, when shared honestly, becomes its own kind of strength. My story had no tidy ending, no point at which all difficulties magically resolved. Instead, it continued to unfold day by day, word by word, in the garden I had reclaimed, in the work that gave my experience meaning, and in the relationships that had been tested, broken, and ultimately remade, imperfect but genuine, fragile but enduring. That, I had learned, was victory enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.